And hello to everyone on the live stream. We're super excited to have you join us today. Again, I'm Jen Consalvo. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of Established. We've been producing the Startup of the Year program for many, many years. And every year that we do it is very exciting. But this one in particular, because there's nothing like, for any of you who were doing this last year online, it's just not the same. It's great. It's a great opportunity, but this just makes all the difference. And so, as one of our top 5 and a long-time fellow entrepreneur friend, Rami Essaid is here and is gracious enough to share his story with us, which I think is a real treat for any startup, anyone, to kind of just hear the reality of a lot of different companies out there. Every company is like a snowflake. They're all different. They all have their unique patterns, and there's always something to learn from. So let's start talking about just your overall entrepreneurial journey. So your last company, Distill, can you tell everyone a little bit about that company?
Yeah, so my first startup was a startup where I dropped out of college, never raised venture capital, and got acqui-hired. A few years after that, about 5 years in the workforce, then I started a company called Distill Networks in 2011. Grew that all the way and sold it in 2019. Along the way, we had raised about $60 million of venture capital from Bessemer and a bunch of great VCs. We scaled up to several hundred employees and got to $25 million of recurring revenue on when we sold the company for 9 figures. So, when you zoom out, it looks like a great journey. And then afterwards, we sold it, took a little bit of time off, and I started Finmark 6 months later, and that's where I am now. So that's my big journey. But when you zoom in to especially Distill, there's a lot of bumps along the way.
Yeah. So can you share with everyone a little bit about like what the company did, set the stage for, you found your product market fit, you started scaling, you started raising money. What did that look like? What was the timeline for that and sort of that trajectory? What were you looking at?
Yeah, so what Distill was a security solution for websites and apps to differentiate between bots and real people online, right? Everybody knows what a bot is now. Back in 2011, nobody knew what a bot was. Nobody had an understanding of what bots were doing maliciously online, posing as real people. So we were actually the first in the marketplace to say, hey, bots are doing bad things. We should filter out bots. The only solution out there before that was CAPTCHA, and you can't put a CAPTCHA on every single page or every single interaction with an app. So we transparently blocked out bots, and we created an industry around that. We were the first to market. The first couple of years were a little bit challenging. We got sued by my previous employer, had to fight that lawsuit off for IP assignment. Then we found product market fit. We were able to start scaling, and things went really, really well. Going from $0 to $1 million in revenue happened really quickly because there was a lot of pent-up demand. Once we figured out our messaging, we scaled up really quickly. We raised a $10 million Series A, kept scaling up, tripled the next year to over $3 million in revenue, and then took a big growth round from Bessemer to really punch it with sales and marketing growth. And so all up until then, minus the early on lawsuit, that scale happened naturally because there was so much pent up demand in a marketplace that had no entrance before us.
So somewhere along the way, let's start with how did you guys manage all of your how big was your company? How many employees did you have?
Yeah, so from day one to our peak, right around where we raised our Series B, right after we raised our Series B, we really scaled up. We got to be just shy of 300 employees.
Wow.
Like about 260 employees.
So these are complex finances.
Yeah.
So how are you managing all of that in the time?
Well, just like any other startup, we had at first outsourced financials, and then we brought a CFO in-house when we raised our Series B. And we built up an in-house accounting team. All of our financials were housed in Excel.
Excel. How many startups are in here? How do you manage your finances? A lot of you use Excel or spreadsheets of some kind, sheets or something. Leading question back there. Okay, so you're using Excel, but you have a CFO, so someone's on top of this. So what is that? How are your models set up? Like, are these things super
converted? 60% of our customers to pay us annually, and we took our $20 million or our $20 million of Series B and tripled the sales team, hired a lot of marketing. But to talk about the complexities of Excel, we discovered 5 months into executing on that plan that there was an error in the model. Effectively, the MRR was right, but in the collection side of things, the model's supposed to forecast collections as well. And in the collections, my CFO accidentally double counted cash for all the customers. So we counted the annual upfront payment, and then we expected them to pay us monthly. But that's not really how they're not going to pay us twice, right? So our MRR and our metrics looked right in the model, but when you dug into the inner workings of it, you realize, oh, we're counting it twice. And we didn't discover that for 5 months. And that was really, really painful. It happened to coincide with competition entering the marketplace. So we're spending a lot more than we ever did before. We're burning more than we thought we were. And now competitors are coming in, making it, elongating our sales cycle and making our sales motion less efficient.
So how did you deal with that?
Yeah,
I was talking to Brian Murphy this morning just about, obstacles, how you deal with obstacles. As an entrepreneur, every day is hard, right?
Yeah.
What do you do in that situation? How do you feel and how do you deal with it personally?
Oh, I mean, when I discovered it, right, like it was a gut punch. It sucked. I jumped on a plane. I discovered it without my CFO, right? And so, I ended up working with an advisor to discover the error. I jumped on a plane to see my investors because we were going to run out of money in a couple of months, and they had just given me a big check, right? It's on me. So I jumped on a plane, talked to each of them, did a mea culpa, right? Like at the end of the day, they had the model, I had the model. Neither of us caught the error, but it's my responsibility. So talk them through it, and really quickly we decided we had to, slash the company. And so a week later, I fired or laid off a third of the company. And that was the hardest part because we had just hired most of these people, right? Like, so it was wasted dollars in trying to train them up, but more so like wasted opportunities for them. They did nothing wrong, right? It was my mistake, our mistake in building that out and having to apologize to say like, guys, like, sorry, you're getting cut. Otherwise we won't have a company and all of us are going to be out. But you did nothing wrong. This is all on me.
How did your investors react?
It was tough. But they there was nothing else that we could do, right? It created a little bit of, they were gun shy, and we'll talk about that at the end, but like at that point, they kind of lost a little bit of faith, right? In how well we're going to scale up, how well we're going to grow. But we, task at hand was to fix things, right? And so we all rolled up our sleeves and fixed things together.
So you fix things, then you exit. What does that exit look like?
Well, I mean, that's where we lost faith, right? I wanted to keep going, but we had one offer come in, and so we hired bankers, ran a process, got a couple of other offers. I thought we should keep going. My co-founders, though, were tired. And my investors, looking back to a few years before, lost faith in us being able to scale up. And they said, hey, bird in a hand's better than two in a bush. And I was kind of outvoted. I could have blocked it, but like, who wants to deal with that dynamic where everybody wants out except you, and you're going to hold them hostage? Like, that's not a great way to build a company. So, I went along with it with the contention of like, hey, I won't join the acquiring company because I don't agree with this acquisition. So that was the path. I mean, it took us 9 months from the beginning offer to the end to close it out. We, made life-changing money, but the day after started the darkest days of my life. For the next 6 months, I was really, really depressed. Not just because I didn't want to sell. Not only that, but my competitor, who we were neck and neck with, we were actually ahead of until we made that mistake. They sold their company a few months later for $1 billion. Right, so 5 times our exit. The biggest difference is they didn't stumble along the way we did, and beyond kind of the FOMO of how they did versus how we did. A lot of my identity was tied to my startup. Like, that's who I was. I was the front face of it all. So my friends all worked for me or for us, and like they stayed on. Like I lost my social network. I lost like my identity. I saw I saw an opportunity to have FU money and like didn't get that because of a mistake. All of those things sent me into a spiral.
So how did you, before we go into your next step, or maybe this was part of it, how did you come out of that?
Entrepreneurship, right? Actually, just mentoring and starting to talk to other startup founders and working with them. And I jumped in and like helped a couple founders, like really rolled up my sleeve and like spent 10 hours a week with like a bunch of different founders and really helped, some companies scale up. Reminded me how much I love building companies. And so I decided, hey, let me go fix the problem that like hurt me before. Let me start my own company and get back into it.
So right before we dive into that, because I love how you took that learning and turned it into something. But when you think about those darkest days, do you think it was because you were upset about the extra comma that you could have had, or because you didn't get the opportunity to try to come back?
A little bit of all of the above. I mean, we were top of the Forrester Wave. We were top of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We invented a category, and then we were going out before we really like owned it. And so it did feel like just an early kind of ducking out. Like we left the party too early. So all of it combined is the answer.
We're not done. I wasn't done.
It didn't feel like it was done.
So okay, so let's talk about Finmark.
Yeah. So the idea of, hey, why is everybody running their finances in Excel? That was the genesis. Taking that pain, I was like, this is a pain point that I know every other founder has. It's hard to understand your numbers. It's hard to keep track, and it's a pain in the butt to do every month, right? Even with a full accounting team and CFO, it took them a month to get me last month's numbers, right? And so it wasn't very dynamic. So we decided to build Finmark to do for financial models what Carta did for cap tables, right? Take it out of Excel, make it more collaborative, less error prone, and use the underlying data to help inform how you should build your company.
I think this is amazing because it's one of those things where you literally, like, we talk about lessons learned, right? Like, not only are you looking back, but now you're saying, this is a common mistake. This is not just us. This is not just me. This isn't a personal failing. This is something that every startup potentially faces. I've had bad models. I don't know about other people, but I've done a lot of spreadsheets in my day and had big flaws that, fortunately I caught, and I wasn't at your scale. When you're at your scale, it makes a much bigger difference. So let's talk a little bit about common mistakes you see with founders, and especially if we can tie it back to some of the things that maybe your company can help with.
Yeah, well, one of the earliest mistakes that I think founders don't do is actually put a plan together, put a plan on paper financially. Like, financials should tell the story of your company and should help you think through all the different aspects, right? Are you going to be charging enough? Is there a big enough market opportunity? How are you going to scale? Are you really ready for venture capital? All of those things kind of intertwine. There's a very specific profile of what a venture capital company should look like. And if you don't put your ideas on paper to validate them, then you get to that point and you realize, oh, wait, this doesn't look exactly right. We made that mistake. Early on, I didn't build out a model. And then we realized our margins weren't where they were supposed to be because we had a very manual onboarding of customers. And we had to stop development at Distill for a year to fix that, so that we could get back to scaling, because my margins just didn't look like what a software company's margins should be because it was too complicated of a onboarding process. So those kinds of lessons I wish I had just thought about really early on before we had hundreds of customers, because it was a lot more painful then. The other big mistake that I think founders make is one that I made when competition came in, is that people think that product market fit is constant, whereas it's really fluid. You might be the best product in a market when there's no other competition, but when competition comes in and does it differently, you need to adapt. And so product market fit is very fluid, and you got to adapt to that. And then the last piece is, I think a lot of people know, a lot of founders know that, have heard that maybe they get too aggressive in their plans, or they get too ambitious with their goals. And there's a lot of people that tell you to kind of simmer down. But the bigger mistake that I see is when things are going well, founders don't lean into it. They don't know how to punch the gas. And if you're building a venture-backed business, once you understand your levers, figure out how you can punch the gas as quickly as possible. Right? There is zero reason not to punch it when things are working. There's a book, the CEO of Snowflake just wrote in his book that, like, as fast as he's grown, he's never in any of his companies hit a point where he thinks he pushed it too fast. Like, imagine that. As fast as Snowflake went to become a unicorn in like 2.5 years to get to $1 billion valuation. They are worth almost as much as IBM in less than 6 years. and he still thinks that he didn't punch it fast enough. So I think that's one of the bigger mistakes that founders make. And it's all about, again, understanding your unit economics and building out a plan and saying, hey, like, what would happen if I took an extra $500,000 and put it here? What would that do to us? Will the wheels of the bus fall off? Is it too rickety? Or do we think that like it'll just make us go faster?
Okay, so we have to wrap up. But last question for you. What are you most excited about over the next, I don't know, 6, 12 months?
So we started Finmark 18 months ago. And a lot of the from then until now has been building the basics of making sure that we have a fully robust platform that can do everything your Excel model can do and more, right? But it's all about the table stakes features of how to build a model. What we're releasing this year is the data intelligence on top of that, where we can open up and say, show me companies that have taken similar amounts of funding as me, that are growing 300% year over year. Show me how much they're spending in marketing. Show me how much they're setting their sales quotas to. I want to unlock this information so that founders can get a blueprint for how they should build their companies. And that's what I'm really excited about this year.
Thank you so much for joining us, for putting it all out there and sharing all those learnings with this group and everyone who's watching on the live stream. We appreciate all your time. Again, Finmark is your new company. Check it out. Great resource for startups. And thank you all for being here. All right.
Thanks.